The singer-songwriter Nick Cave said, "We are capable of the greatest atrocities and the deepest sufferings, all culminating in a vast collective grief. This is our shared condition. This is where meaning establishes itself, within the connectedness, nested in our shared suffering." We might present ourselves as collected and easygoing, but we are all suffering in our own ways. We are grieving, not just about people who have died, but the things in our life that have changed. We are depressed and anxious at how much is changing in our lives. We can't hold on to things for long before they leave our grasp. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "Misfortune is the rule." And if you want a safe compass to guide you through life, and to banish all doubt as to the right way of looking at it, you cannot do better than accustom yourself to regard this world as a penitentiary. Viewing life like it is a prison means we view others as fellow prisoners, fellow sufferers. This can help one feel less alone. If you are in chronic pain, for example, you can take solace in the fact that there are many others who are also dealing with the same challenges. If you are depressed, you don't have to feel lonely and isolated. Many people are trying to climb out of the deep hole of suffering they have ended up in. You are not alone. We are part of a vast collective grief. But how can this fact improve our lives? The key is to accept that suffering is the rule. All pleasures are simply returning to a neutral state, where one is no longer suffering. So, if suffering is the rule, how can we manage to be tranquil day to day? Where does suffering come from? According to the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle, much suffering, much unhappiness, arises when you take each thought that comes into your head for the truth. It is rare to question the validity of the thoughts that come into your head, but it is necessary in order to be more in tune with reality. Cognitive behavioral therapy, a modern-day therapy inspired by Stoicism, is where you interrogate your thoughts to change your behavior, and thus change your emotions. How we feel stems from negative thought patterns. Therefore, if we change our thinking, we can reduce the amount of suffering we experience. But if you have believed in a negative thought and are now in the grip of deep suffering, what do you do? According to Tolle, the best way of responding to the suffering is to surrender. Surrender to the grief, despair, fear, loneliness, or whatever form the suffering takes. Witness it without labeling it mentally. Allow it to be there. Embrace it. Then see how the miracle of surrender transmutes deep suffering into deep peace. Realize that suffering is necessary. It is a gateway into awakening. Awakening from the illusion of thoughts. Only when you can't take any more mental pain will you wake up to the present moment. Much of our suffering comes from resisting the moment we are in. One day, you will reach a point where this mode of living becomes too much, and you will awaken. The spiritual teacher Alan Watts said, "Awakening is not to know what this reality is. Awakening is to know what reality is not. It is to cease identifying with any object of knowledge whatsoever." This doesn't mean one shouldn't think, but simply one should realize reality isn't the labels we put on things. A tree isn't a tree, because how can something so beautiful and mysterious be reduced down to one syllable? It's a sound. A sound. Tree. Is that what it is? Knowing that you don't know is an essential step towards awakening. But if we are going to suffer, how does one suffer well? As argued by the popular self-help writer Mark Manson, we must choose the things we give a fuck about. If we give a fuck about everything, we will always suffer. we must be selective with our fucks. If we care about how we are perceived by others, our social standing in a group, or how many likes our posts get, we will suffer. These are constant sources of suffering, as the happiness we seek from them is out of our control. If we are going to suffer, why don't we choose, as much as we can, to have control over our suffering? And not only that, to make the enduring of suffering worthwhile. The first step to choosing your suffering is to surrender yourself to it, and understand it is needed for personal growth. Exercise is a good example of useful suffering. Your muscles have to suffer for you to build your arms and legs. You will suffer in order to improve your cardio when running. And if you want to get really good at something, you must work hard at it. The American entrepreneur Jeffrey Bezos said, "Stress doesn't come from hard work. Stress primarily comes from not taking action over something that you can have some control over." We suffer because we are so preoccupied with the things we can't control that we don't recognize the things we can. If you really want to get good at something, you have to suffer. The key is to choose your suffering. A method of enduring suffering and taking the first step towards realizing your potential is to understand all who have suffered before. The Roman emperor and Stoic Marcus Aurelius wrote, "All things are the same, familiar in enterprise, momentary in endurance, coarse in substance. All things now are as they were in the day of those whom we have buried." Those who suffered in the past are now dead. Seeking comfort in an attempt to avoid all suffering is folly. You will fail continuously. If you stay in bed all day, eating junk food and watching TV, you will get physically and mentally ill. Our bodies have evolved to be active, so your body will make you suffer as a message to get up and exercise. It is important to remember that one day you will die, so with the time you have left you have to make a choice. Choose to suffer pointlessly, or choose to suffer purposefully, so you can become a strong, resilient person and be a valuable contributor to society. Many of us have a negative attitude towards suffering. Therefore, we try to avoid it as much as we can. Depression can come from continually seeking comfort over challenges. If we do this, when challenges come, we won't be mentally resilient enough to face them, as we haven't trained ourselves. The Stoic Seneca wrote, "If you would not have a man flinch when the crisis comes, train him before it comes." The Stoics trained themselves with voluntary discomfort. They would take time out of their day to remove things which gave them comfort, so they would be more prepared for challenges that might come. Voluntary discomfort is awareness that suffering is the rule. A bad day will come, so it makes rational sense to prepare for it. Seneca wrote to set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition I feared?" You could sleep on the floor for one night, take a cold shower, try intermittent fasting, turn off the heating, and eat only basic meals for a few days. Do things that make you uncomfortable, to train yourself to endure the inevitable suffering that will come. This is why running is so essential. Running is awful. Your legs and feet ache, you are out of breath, and you are sometimes battling the elements. Rain, wind, cold. Why put yourself through so much discomfort when you could be in your warm bed? Running is a form of voluntary discomfort, an acknowledgement that life is hard and unfair. So it is important to prepare yourself. Essentially, you are choosing to suffer, so when suffering isn't a choice, you are better prepared to face it. Marcus Aurelius said, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This is a form of negative visualization, so when you encounter these people, you'll be ready for it. Voluntary discomfort helps us with the idea that the world isn't a warm bed. It will have inevitable challenges. It is in our control whether or not we train to face them with clarity of mind. Schopenhauer wrote, "The appropriate form of address between man and man ought to be not monsieur, sir, but fellow sufferer." It is an important realization that we are all suffering. Behind the masks we wear in social settings, there is something broken inside all of us. This knowledge connects us with all people. We all have our problems, and we are all going to die. Another way of putting your suffering in context is to think of those in the past who have thought the same thoughts as you and who are suffering in the same way. As sung in the Smith song Cemetery Gates, all those people, all those lives, where are they now? With loves and hates and passions just like mine. They were born, and then they lived, and then they died. Take your perspective out of your restricted point of view, and think about the millions who have suffered before you, who are currently suffering now, and who will suffer in the future. You are not alone. So, goodbye, fellow sufferer, and thanks for watching.